I realized that productivity was kind of pushed onto us when we were little, as the productivity seemed to be related to grades. Like if we got good grades, then maybe we could do whatever we wanted in the weekend. Somehow the parents were happy, the teachers were happy. And as kids, I think we got that it was like, oh, if I do that stuff that often doesn't really mean anything to me as a child, but I'm doing it to get that stuff, that good stuff that otherwise if I don't do the way I'm asked, I get punished and I get, bad grades and then all sorts of really bad things happen. Like I'm grounded and all sorts of not good things. And so I think we've equated productivity very early on to like what these people, big, taller, more powerful people around us had us do. And I don't think it has much to do with what was inspiring to us, what was meaningful to us.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Woven Wings Live, where we bring you wisdom and tools for vibrant living. I'm your host, Gabe Crane. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Rahul Didwania. And if you enjoy listening to us, please share our episode, our podcast, with a friend or leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow along our journey by joining our newsletter. And if you're not already watching this episode on YouTube, you can find the video of this episode on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. You can find the links to all those things in our show description. And today we have a wonderful guest, Sophie Chiche, who's here to talk with us about the productivity paradox, examining why we don't do what we want. And I am very excited for this episode today. I think productivity is such a fascinating and interesting topic that I personally have a lot of resistance to. I'm probably like you. I'm very drawn to being productive. I want to accomplish things, but at the same time, I find myself asking, why should I be so productive? And what is this big focus on productivity? And is there something misplaced around that? So I think Sophie is going to be able to come in here and really help us to illuminate some different dimensions of this conversation. And so on that note, Rahul, it's great to be reconnected with you, man. We haven't done an episode for a few weeks. I was out and on a little vacation, which might factor into our conversation today. But how are you, Rahul? And how are you thinking today about the productivity paradox and this conversation we're going to have with Sophie?
Yeah, good to be with you as always, Gabe, and thanks for bringing me in. I also have, I'd say, a pretty on and off relationship with productivity. At times, really wanting to enhance my productivity, bring it more online, and sharpen it and hone it. As a way for me to advance and do the things I want to do. At other times, I think I might feel a little bit more of what you're alluding to, right? Which is a resistance to the idea, sometimes a feeling that hey, this idea of productivity has been like hoisted on us, right? And is it actually the way to be or to live? And I think sometimes I'm caught in that, that quandary, but probably more often than not, I'm more in that first camp of thinking about my own productivity, wanting to unlock kind of the next level of it. We're always surrounded by people talking about productivity, and so for me, I think it's interesting just to notice some of my own narratives around it. I think when I feel productive or feel that I have been productive, I feel really good. I think both during the process, it's usually characterized by being in flow. And, we've talked a bunch about flow on this show in different forms. And I think over time, I've even built some of my own, like, call it like mental or physical associations with that feeling of flow that are positive. But then the more common or maybe prevailing narratives for me are ones in which I beat myself up over lapses in productivity. I think that's something I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, right? Like getting distracted, losing flow, burning periods of time that are neither productive nor restorative. I know you just talked about going on vacation, but I'm talking about like the times when I want to be productive, but I'm not, right? And so I think this idea of examining why we don't do what we want to do is like super fascinating to me, right? When we know there's something that if we do it and we get to the other side of it, or even during it, we'll feel good. It's what we're supposed to do, and we don't. I think like what's happening there, and very, very much looking forward to Sophie's perspective on all that. But yeah, on the whole, I think this is to me an ever present topic. It's one in which I've felt development on my own end, but also feel like there's so much more to go. And so, yeah, looking forward to just exploring this idea of not just why we don't do what we do, but what does it look like to actually unlock that connection to what Sophie calls purposeful productivity. So, yeah, lot of different angles here that I'm excited to explore.
Yeah, there's just so much to this topic and so many layers of societal construction, around our sense of identity and our sense of value that we give to ourselves, if we're fulfilling our purpose or making a meaningful contribution, or maybe we're just making a bunch of money and getting rich, or whatever it is. When we are not doing that, I think we feel a really strong sense of judgment from kind of the overmind, the super ego that we have internalized and that we sense in our perceptions of the outside world, of other people, our perceived judgments that they have towards us. And then underneath all of that, the kernel of doing something that is beautiful and meaningful and that actually inspires you. I think that's something we're all seeking and longing for underneath. And so before we go further, let's bring Sophie onto the show. Sophie Chiche is an accomplished author, keynote speaker, and multi-passionate entrepreneur. She is equal parts philosophical and practical, and has the unique ability to cut through the stories that keep people trapped in realities that don't match their dreams. Sophie has a very impressive resume. She has multiple master's degrees in business, journalism, and psychology. Her career spans several industries, and she's been featured on Ellen, The Today Show, Good Morning America, Forbes, the Los Angeles Times, and the New York Times, amongst others. And she's a 2-time TEDx speaker. And she's generally, there's so much we could talk with Sophie about, but she is passionate about teaching her clients, which she works with one-on-one, the strategies they need to deliver purpose, profit, and impact for the good of humanity. And so on that note, Sophie, I want to welcome you onto the show and say thank you so much for joining us today. It's awesome to be with you. And maybe as just a starting point for our conversation, maybe I want to invite you to comment on the little back and forth Rahul and I have had, and this notion that's in our title of this episode, the productivity paradox. Maybe we could start there. How do you define that? What is the productivity paradox? And how are folks that are listening to the show maybe encountering that in their own life?
Wow. Hi. That was beautiful questions already. Well, I was actually enjoying listening to you because you're talking about a topic that I'm so inspired by and that I've been studying for so long, and yet you're saying things that were very you were pushing on interesting triggers for me. So I'm really as well very excited to get in there. One of the things you said to respond right away is that I realized that productivity was kind of pushed onto us when we were little, as the productivity seemed to be related to grades. Like if we got good grades, then maybe we could do whatever we wanted in the weekend. Somehow the parents were happy, the teachers were happy. And as kids, I think we got that it was like, oh, if I do that stuff that often doesn't really mean anything to me as a child, but I'm doing it to get that stuff, that good stuff that otherwise if I don't do the way I'm asked, I get punished and I get, bad grades, and then all sorts of really bad things happen. Like I'm grounded and all sorts of not good things. And so I think we've equated productivity very early on to like what these people, big, taller, more powerful people around us had us do. And I don't think it has much to do with what was inspiring to us, what was meaningful to us. I mean, in some cases, maybe like a couple percent of the people probably were to study what is taught in school. But I think for a lot of us, it really wasn't matching. And so what happens, I think, is we grow up with like, oh, let's continue to get this approval from the outside world. Like, if I do this, it looks like mom is happy. If I do this, it looks like my friends are happy or the peers are happy or any of those. But we don't really deeply connect in many cultures. I mean, in some, hopefully a little more. But certainly where I grew up in France, where there is so much that is done to yank me out of my true inner feeling, like the way I eat, the way I, don't eat now, eat now, it's time to eat, you're not hungry, finish the plate, you're not cold, put a sweater on. It was just like all that stuff that's pushed onto us that's not fully allowing us to connect. And so then we grow up a little bit and now we're trying to connect, but often the path to really hearing our deep purpose has been messed up a little bit. And so I think the purposeful productivity, I think has a lot to do with re realigning, reconnecting with this inner desires that we had and that somehow we were convinced we're not right, we're not good. I think we there.
Is that safe for us to trust? Can we trust that if I connect with my inner sense of purpose, or like what I really feel like doing in a given day, that life will work out? You know what I mean? I think productivity, I love what you shared about. I 100% agree about the way we get conditioned to value productivity as a way of getting affirmation from our parents or from the society around us. And then I think as you become an adult, it gets real, and you're confronted with, if I'm not productive, I will fail. I'll die. I will not be successful. I won't have the money to support myself. I won't be able to achieve certain things that are also, like expressions of productivity. I won't be able to have a family. I won't be able to just basically survive. And I think that many of us encounter this feeling of like, I want to trust some deeper mystical spiritual sense of purpose, but I can't really do that. That's dangerous. Like, if I do that, then I'll die. I will fail. And so it is that safe? Can we actually tune in with our inner sense of purpose as a way to become productive?
I love that you went there because not necessarily would be my answer. Yes, ultimately, yes, entirely. But I think we've covered up our true self with other things that sounded like the truth at some moment. It's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking, because I used to be 350 pounds. I've gained a lot of weight in my life. I was very, very heavy. And the truth for a long time seemed to be have chocolate cake and you'll be fine. Like there was almost kind of a misconstrued, wisdom and guidance that seemed to say, oh, if you're sad, eat chocolate cake. If you're angry, eat chocolate cake. There was something about, and that was not true. That was not an approach that was self-caring. And so I would say, yes, but it's not just whatever I want. There is something to the wisdom that comes from growing my self-love, like now when I eat, I'm guided by, is this bite going to give me energy? Is this going to suck my energy? Is it going to make me go for a run or for a deep conversation that requires my clarity? Or is it going to lead to me needing a nap and watching some meaningless television? And so I do think that ultimately it came for me from rising enough self-love that then I could trust the voice. When I was in a self-destructive pattern, I would say that the voice was guiding me to do what I would do to protect myself as a child, which was not necessarily good guidance. It was more, I was trying to survive in an environment that was extremely predatory and extremely dangerous, frankly. And in this particular example, gaining weight was a way to protect myself, but it wasn't from an act of self-love. It was from an act of like, wow, if I'm super overweight and I live in this giant castle, it seems like people leave me alone a little more. But it wasn't a genuine love of self. So I would say yes and no. I think there's a different sound. When someone lies to you, it sounds a little different than when someone tells you the truth. Have you ever identified that? It's almost like a bell that's like, like it doesn't sound as harmonious. I would say it's true for the inner guidance. That's something that says, go do something that's self-destructive is probably not true guidance. I think that's a bit of a lie. So to identify which one is which is probably a good step in the path.
Yeah, I really like the use of the term inner guidance. I think what I'm picturing is we all have a compass within us that gives us a sense of, what's going to be self-enhancing versus what's going to be self-destructive. Now that compass can get broken, especially early in our lives. There's so many other influences that might dictate where that compass is pointing, might be giving us false signals, or we might not know that it's pointing in the wrong direction. But what I'm hearing is, hey, over time, as you cultivate, a sense of self-love, we've talked a lot about the idea of self-compassion on this show. We've talked also about this concept of resonance, tuning into that resonant frequency that comes from kind of being aligned with your inner self and allowing that to kind of come forward. That when we're operating from that place, we're much more likely to be able to trust our compass. And then therefore, when you build productivity on top of that, is kind of what I'm hearing, that becomes part of a useful, fruitful, generative pursuit, as opposed to one that, might be actually tearing us down. Am I tracking all that right, Sophie?
Very much so. And that is probably the paradox. Like a lot of people are trying to be productive, but it's aligned with something that doesn't really mean anything to them. Like when people tell me that they're procrastinating on something, I'm fascinated. I want to know what that is, because there's a good chance it's something that's actually not aligned. Like when you find yourself, messing around with this, like inventing something or building something or doing something with your kids, and it really is, you're present with what's happening. There's no procrastination doesn't even enter the picture. You're present with what's happening. And so once you've aligned your inner guidance, to use that word again, you can tell which are the things that are guiding you in the right direction, and you want to do those things. And then the ones that are not, a lot of my clients will procrastinate on things that they really truly don't want to be doing. So it's like, yay, let's capture what that is. Let's start tracking those things that are so incredibly met with resistance inside of us. Like why are we resisting something that, if it's either it's good for us and we're resisting it because we need to rise more self love and deserving and all these good things, or it's really not aligned and we should listen and attempt to do something else and redirect the boat in a different direction. So either way, it's really good information, I find.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on that split really quickly, because you're preempting where my mind was going. Is I was like, but there's so many examples of things that I know are good for me, that I might even go so far as to say I enjoy doing, but even then, I might not do it, right? I might not kind of push forward on it. And I think what I just heard from you there, Sophie, is, oh, that might be because our own self love or our self care, image of self has not risen to the level of kind of setting us up to go after that. I mean, that's, I guess, the central paradox, right, that we're talking about. I was wondering if you can elaborate on that part of it even further. Like, what does it mean to not have the amount of self love, needed to do something that we know is good for us?
Yeah, actually, Gay Hendricks wrote a beautiful book called The Big Leap, where he talks very deeply about this concept that I find absolutely aligned with this, which is the upper limit problem, which has to do with, here I am going into life and something good happens and I walk away from it, or I destruct it. I truly will do acts to destroy it and interrupt it because it's not matching with my perception of what I deserve. If I deserve all of the goodness and I deserve love and I deserve wealth and I deserve health, then I will embrace all those things, as when they come, I'll say, yeah, that's exactly what my life is to be, like children often do before we mess with them. And so the upper limit problem is when you get to a new level of success and there's a part of you that says, oh, no, this is too much. This is too much goodness. This is too much joy. How often have we met people that are very successful in their career, but they're destroying their health? Or maybe their health is wonderful, but they have really destructive relationships. Or it's like, somehow I watch a lot of humans, you tell me if that's true for you, that can't seem to receive and accept from the universe the whole shabam. It seems like a lot of people find a way to sabotage one or the other. Would you say that's true? Like, have you experienced that in humans around you?
Oh,
Mhm.
absolutely. Absolutely.
No, I was going to say, I think it's almost like a human condition to grow ourselves into accepting more, growing that box, growing this ability. I remember when I was offered to work on a project with Oprah, which Oprah is one of the people that had me. It's one of the reasons I came to this country from France when I was a young adult. And I had an opportunity to work with her. And I was sick for 3.5 weeks. Like, I remember vomiting and waking up in cold sweat and being absolutely terrified at this idea. And I actually had a conversation with Gay, who's a good friend of mine, Gay Hendricks, and he said this is a moment for you where there's a possibility that no longer fits in what you think you deserve. You don't see her as a peer, you don't see that you deserve to be in that room. Some of what you're working on is as interesting to her as it is to you. I see no from the outside, I see no resistance. What you experiencing inside of you is you kind of hitting against that wall that now is pushing against what I believe to be deserving. And so I had to work to push that boundary to welcome more, to accept more, to be willing to receive more, if that makes sense.
It totally does. And I'm wondering if we can go back to like the beginning point. So for folks who are struggling with the kind of the first question, right? That the paradox of how do I become more productive? How do I achieve my dreams? Or do I need to deconstruct what I'm trying to accomplish? And maybe what I'm seeking is not really worthy, or it's not really aligned with what's truly good for me. When you're working with your clients, Sophie, how do you help, the proverbial get off the couch problem? Are we getting off the couch and getting out into the world? I think we've established so far in our conversation, we have to get in touch with a sense of inner purpose. I mean, what if someone just wants to sit on the couch? And I know that most of us don't really truly want to sit on the couch. We all want to do something deep down. But, I come back to your experience of overeating and eating that chocolate cake, right? And I'm also drawing on, I should say, for this question, I'm drawing on my experience recently, as I said to Rahul at the top of the show, being on vacation for the last few weeks. And I found as I was on vacation, I did like a staycation. So it wasn't like I didn't go travel and see stuff. I just sat on my couch, and it was more than that. I live on Maui. I went to waterfalls. I spent great time with a new person in my life, but I didn't want to do anything. And actually, I live a pretty busy, I would think, purposeful life. My schedule is full, right? And I found myself sitting there on the couch and looking at all that stuff and just being like, why am I doing all these things? And is it really what's good for me? And when you get that chance to stop doing what you've been doing, and you kind of decompress, or if you go on a retreat or a meditation retreat, you kind of start to feel rejuvenated and filled back up. And I found myself just asking, like, well, wait, why am I doing all the things that I'm doing? And I'm doing them because I love them and I think they're purposeful and I find I derive meaning from them. They're making a contribution, but also they make me tired. Like I also just want to sit here on this couch and do nothing. I want to scroll on my phone. I want to watch a silly, meaningless TV show. I want to smoke a joint, and it's like, uh, what do we say to folks like that, like myself, who are then, grappling with this sense after I came out of the vacation, I'm like, okay, it's time to go back to work and to get back into the grind of the world. And I just have been feeling so much inner conflict about that, and so much like apathy in a way of, what am I trying to accomplish here? What am I trying to produce? And what is it that's actually important for me to be spending my time on? So I think that is just my like micro example from the last few weeks. But I think that people with this productivity question are always encountering that because, as you said, it's constructed, we get these messages at an early age about going out and doing things. And I think we naturally, we want to fulfill those and we also resist them. because, as you said, something doesn't ring quite true about it. If we start with that, like, what do you say to folks in that kind of general range of experiences to kind of get them moving in the right direction?
It's a little difficult to have an answer that would fit for all. But in your particular case, one thing that is really striking me is that you did ask the questions. Why am I doing those things? Is a really interesting question, which if you're in the race and you're just going, 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 and you get up and you go and you start your day and you never pause and you never take a second, in your particular case, I think it led you to a very healthy moment of, okay, why? I mean, you're not saying, why am I doing this with the expectation that it's a bad thing. If you ask from a place of curiosity, of like, why am I doing, like, truly, why am I doing those things? Well, because I need money to raise my children. And great, then I'm doing something that has that particular purpose at this moment, which may or may not be true forever. So when something starts to feel out of alignment, it's the proper thing to pause and say, is this fulfilling me? Is this something that actually, some people, to answer your question, when I work with some of my clients, they live a life that costs them so much money. They have to continue to produce and to do all these things that are not really aligned with them at all, because it has to pay for this other life. But if you were to pause for a second and say, let's move to Maui, or let's decide to raise goats in a farm in the middle of Montana, or whatever, turns you on, you may no longer have to do all these productivity things that make no sense to you. So there is something really wise to pausing and asking ourselves those questions, because a lot of us are living lives that are not led by our own desires. They're led by society expects it of me, parents expected it of me to start with. Now I expect it of myself. When really, truly, if we had the honesty, and it's not honesty versus lying, but if we had the integrity, audacity, courage to say, hey, like, let's just stop that boat. That's one of the reasons I moved out of LA, because it was putting me, I was letting it put me in a rhythm, in a cadence that just wasn't mine anymore. It was when I was in my 20s, but then it wasn't. And I think we have the right to pause and say, all right, this was the track that made sense when I was in my 20s or my 30s or whatever, but now this track doesn't make sense. And because society has been so violent, is the word that comes to mind, but so intensely trying to get us out of our own hearts, we believe that we have to keep doing it. And I say we don't. We totally have the right to say, all right, I studied medicine, but really I want to be an architect. Hallelujah, go be an architect. Like, there's no reason not to. There's no reason not to ask those questions. And I think society, if whatever they are, or whatever that world outside of us that we let manipulate us a little bit. I mean, there are some people that are making a lot of money trying to make us do what they want us to do. They want us to spend the time watching that meaningless TV show. They want us to buy this food that's completely emptied of any kind of nutrient. They want us to eat all this sugar, because then we get all, addicted, and we all want to eat more sugar. And there are people that have intentions, people or entities, let's just say. I don't think it's one individual on top of some mountain. I think as a society, somehow consumption has become a lot more important than truly listening to ourselves. So there we are, listening to whatever they're telling us. I remember once walking in a store, which I won't name because I'm about to. The music was so loud and the darkness was so dark, and they had this perfume all over the place. I mean, and for people that are sensitive or slightly present, I walked in and I was like, whoa, like, what is happening? Why are they putting me in the dark with such loud music that I'm no longer able to even hear myself think? And the smell that made me completely disgusted. It was just all about an outer, right? And I watched people kind of numbnessly putting things in their carts, just buying things that made no sense. And I walked out and I said, wow, it's like someone really thought deeply about, how do I get these people to walk in and forget who they are, forget that they don't need any of these things or need them, and that they're going to put money on credit cards they don't have, on money they can't, and somehow, that's where we are as a society. We have a lot of that going on. And I personally would like to say that I contribute to the conversation to take a different turn, which is, who are you? What do you want? What makes you happy? Why do you want to be on the beach with your child? Why is that turning you on? And how could you do more of that? Is the conversation I want to be having.
So I think I just want to, I really love everything you just shared there. And one of the polarities I heard you talk about is productivity and consumption. And I think that's part of what I think we're deconstructing here on this show, is that productivity, the way you just defined productivity is different than I think the way most people look at it. I mean, I think productivity for a lot of people is the opportunity to consume. It's like if I produce more, then I get to consume more. But in your examples, one of which I know personally, moving to Maui, right? Or I love this image of goats in Montana. Like, is that, how is that productive? Because for a lot of people, I think, you talked about moving from LA. We're in these worlds of aspirational climbing, and goats in Montana does not fit that, unless it's like, because you won the whole game and then you retired and you bought a goat ranch that you fly your private jet to once a year. It's like, can you just elaborate on that a little bit more in terms of how you're defining productivity, and how deciding to move to Montana or Arizona or do something off the beaten track could actually be an expression of productivity?
Well, because productivity, if it's not tied to bringing you happiness, what was the point in the first place? Like, if productivity is just moving a bunch of widgets, then the Industrial Revolution was all about that. Like, how do I go from moving 12 widgets to moving 14 so that I produce even more? I mean, that is the definition. If you go to the dictionary, it will give you a definition around that. Like, how do I make the system make me produce more? It is completely not tied to, am I producing something that means something to me or to society or to, it's completely tied to consumption, the way we were just talking about it. I think the misnomer that we were sold along the way is that is going to give us happiness, more t-shirts, more things, bigger cars. And listen, I love my car. I have a cool car. My house is incredible. Like, this is not like, let's go live in, poverty, but let's line up so that when you actually contributing with what you are meant to be contributing, and maybe that is where this conversation goes a little bit more spiritual, which is, where are you? Like, I wasn't born to be a gymnast in the Olympics. I know, because as a child, I wasn't, upside down all day long trying to run as fast as possible. That just wasn't my shtick. My shtick was, caring for my friends and figuring out how to be the one that on the sandbox everyone talks to, and figures out how to deal with their difficult parents. And therefore, I became a coach, a psychologist, like all these things. It made complete sense. So I do think that it's a combination of what lights you up. And if it is goats in Montana, I would say it's highly productive for you to go and move to Montana. If it's not really for you and you're doing it because that could also be another counter, some people did it just because that's not what people do, and they started doing it just out of like another act of rebellion, which is also not an act of freedom. It's still, an act of, I do the opposite of what society wants me to do. I'm still not doing what I want. So maybe this conversation could also take us a little bit to, like, what do we want? Like, as you individually, personally, what is actually your path, your meaning? Like, when you speak to your children in 5 years and 20 years, did you like what happened? Like, can you turn around and say, when we're 90 years old, I'll be there before you, most likely. But when we're sitting there, can we turn around and be like, I loved what happened. I love what I did. I love how I did it. I took the turns. I had the courage to do these things. And that is productive. So maybe I should rename what I do and not call it productivity, but rather a search for a vibrant life, which is probably why we are having this conversation.
Yeah, I love this recasting of what that term means. And I think if I'm tracking everything here, right, we're actually saying, hey, in the moments where you don't feel, let's call it traditionally productive, right, where we're producing widgets or getting a lot of work done, or whatever it might be. I think what I heard you say earlier in Gabe's example was, use that as information, right? That might be information that either you're, working on something that's not meaningful to you, or maybe the other thing that I'm adding in is that you've forgotten what the purpose is, right? So, for example, you might be working on something or working hard, and it's like you said earlier, Sophie, it's because you want to or need to provide for your family, and that's the constraint that you're in, and you don't have other options. That might be enough. That might be enough to be able to derive a sense of purpose and energy from, but often you might lose sight of that or build resentment, around that feeling of being trapped. On the other hand, it could be, hey, you're actually doing something that isn't meaningful to you, and we get caught in the hamster wheel. One thing leads to another. Momentum kind of carries us through a particular path, and I think unless we have those moments where we can take a step back and evaluate, it's very possible that we don't see it, right? I mean, that's what the midlife crisis is, right? I think even what you were alluding to at 60, 70, 80, 90 happens even earlier for a lot of people, where they look back and they're like, hey, I've been productive, but to what end, right? Do I actually feel good about what I've been building towards? And so, with all that said, what is the way to stay connected to ourselves through all of these forces that might be pulling us away from that, right? Whether it's something as simple as kind of the next big thing on something that originally felt meaningful to us, and we just keep following the trend, and we lose sight of the fact that maybe we're not as energized by it anymore, as one scenario, or just these forces that even Gabe was talking about earlier, right? The quote unquote practical forces that lead us to prioritize productivity in a certain way, or if it's just keeping up with the Joneses or keeping up with our friends, if they're accomplishing a lot, right? There's so many forces that remind us of, needing to be more productive. And how do we kind of keep connection with ourselves through all of that?
It's really a beautiful question. And I also want to bring in the idea of internal and personal beliefs, because there is a world where you do what is meaningful and you make shitloads of money. Like, it doesn't have to be split as, or either I do something that really moves my heart and I live in a hut and don't need much, or I'm doing something that's like corporating killing me, and it's okay because I make all this money. Like, I think we already need to kind of reframe this, that we very much could be doing what's very meaningful and be making a lot of wealth. Maybe not the kind of wealth, maybe not the jet, although we could find friends and we buy a jet together. Maybe buying it on our own is a little much, possibly. But I do think that there is an alignment that we deserve to be doing something that we love and make money. That needs to be a little bit we need to rewire this a little bit in our society. Like, I know when I grew up, there was, which was, I'm in my soon to be 60, there was definitely a culture of, you either were completely out of bounds and doing whatever made sense to you, the proverbial goat's farm of sorts, and you were not making a lot of money, but you were following your whatever. There was that, or you were living the corporate race and you were absolutely miserable and your body was breaking down, but you had the cool car. And I don't live in that world. I think there really is a world where we could have both, and we by nurturing, by going deeper in who we are, I think there is a river of wealth that we don't tap into, because fear, somehow along the way, we've lost the trust that we could do what we love and be supported by that. And I already would like to open the conversation to, like, is it possible that we could tap into a true alignment with ourselves? Does not mean living in poverty.
So I don't want to trample on Rahul's question around how do we stay connected with that state throughout, throughout the kind of the challenges that the world gives us. But I do find, like, what you just shared is really fascinating, and I feel like the voices of I don't know, all of us, the proletariat, like it's not true, Sophie. It's not possible. It is that way. Like you're either a hippie on the goat farm, or you've got the SUV and the car. And like, what is this magical realm that you have found that somehow is integrating both of those things? Like I'm thinking about all these folks that I've also coached and worked with at different stages, who are working like a high paying programming position at a tech company, and they're miserable, but it's like, but that is where there is these kind of life changing amounts of wealth available. And so I know you just laid that out for us, but I'm present seeing that resistance of like, no, it's not true. It's like, it's a nice idea, but it's a fantasy. Like, can you help all of us who have those voices rattling around understand more what you are talking about, and maybe how to go? Because I mean, it looks really nice where you are, like it seems like you got something figured out, and we want to know more how to actually get there.
What's interesting is I think those two things are related. The question you were asking, Rahul, about how do we stay connected to that comes is kind of it's the wealth, it's the juice that feeds whatever you're saying, Gabe, that you're wanting more of, or hoping for, or that you don't believe in, that you're resisting the idea that it's even possible. So to answer the first question, I would say one has to slow down. One has to stop the noise, the alcohol, the porn, the gambling, the addictions of all things, to be with oneself. That is how you start to be more connected. I know when I was eating enormous amount, you don't get to 350 pounds by eating a little too much salad. Like, it is definitely a pattern of eating a lot of destructive food. The reason I was eating those things was to help me not feel anything. It was about, making all the sharp corners much rounder so that I could cope with what the world was, which was really difficult when I was growing up. And so to have the courage, there was a beautiful scene in a Disney movie called Mulan, where Mulan is this woman who pretends to be a man so she can go to war so that her older father, they don't have a son, and so the older father would have to go to war because a man has to go, and so she becomes a man or pretends to be a man so she can go to war and her father doesn't have to. But they send with her the what do they call them? The ancients send with her this little mini guy. She doesn't know it, but they send this little um, cricket looking, very little guy to protect her and to make sure that she's okay while she's doing this. And so off she goes, and with the guys. And there's this incredible scene that's changed my life forever, I would say, where this cricket is behind the rocks and he has a little fire, and he's using this megaphone, and he's super loud, and he's like, the fire makes his shadow on the wall look like he's giant dragon, and she's over there and she's like, whoa, like, what is this? And then she kind of like at some point gently goes towards the rock, and she like looks behind the rock, and there's this little cricket that's like this big, and she laughs, and she's like, what are you? I think our feelings are very much like that. We have this vision of them, that they're like this giant thing that's going to eat us, and we're going to like drown in anger or sadness or loneliness or all these things. And so we stay in, one side of the cave, and we don't ever go look at them. But when we look at them, they kind of little crickets that are making a lot of noise with a megaphone. And so when we allow ourselves to feel our feelings, we tap into this. It's almost kind of, if we don't, we can't tap into the wisdom. We can't tap into this incredible, what is it? I mean, it's the thing that's sustaining us midair right now, like whatever we want to call it. Like, we could actually right now be upside down. I don't know if you realize that, you guys. That's one of the things that fascinates me the most about this planet. The planet could be upside down. We would be upside down, but we wouldn't even notice because it's that powerful and that intelligently designed. So if there is that power out there, why not tap into that? And I think that is right on the other side of fear. It's on the other side of curiosity. It's on the other side of daring to say, I don't want a life of consumption where I'm just being shoved down my throat things I don't need, to impress people I don't care about, with money I don't have. It's like that is just not that is not something that I have to participate in. Once I pause and I go into this place of conversation of who am I and what really matters to me. It's a big conversation. I can
Kind of big, just kind of big.
It doesn't. It's a big.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, oh man, kind of big. And so, I was just thinking, Sophie, like, what, the toolkit that you were just talking about, right, is, hey, being aware that we have all these patterns of behavior, whether it's, food addiction, or maybe more common nowadays is like a Netflix or YouTube addiction, right? And all these different forms of numbing ourselves to what we're actually feeling, or softening the hard edges so that we don't have to engage with that. An antidote as old as time, right, is this idea of pausing, and within that pause, connecting with ourselves and being honest with ourselves, and allowing those feelings that are telling us something also to pass through, so that we can kind of get access to our agency, within all of that. Bringing it down from maybe the larger kind of broad context that we were talking about, I wanted to surface one of the examples that we talked about before the show, and bring it back to sort of the title of this, right? This idea of like, why do we not do the things that we know we want, the things that we know will make us feel good, right? And I think, you used the example, Sophie, when we were chatting, of there was this vitamin. You knew you needed to take the vitamin. It was right in front of you. You designed the environment so that it wasn't even in a drawer or in a thing. It was there. There was no friction to you taking the vitamin. You knew you needed to take the vitamin, and you didn't, and you walked away from it. And I think there are a million examples of that, right? And in each of our lives. And I can point to so many of those where I feel like I've applied all of the productivity hacks and whatnot to kind of make the action easy, so to speak. And I've done the thinking about why the action is important. I've maybe even experienced the benefit of the action in the past. And so it's not some completely abstract thing. And yet still, and maybe this is going to Gabe's point of just still sometimes I just want to sit on the couch and I don't want to get up and take the vitamin. So what's happening there? Why do we not follow through on the things that we have experienced as being positive for us, and still aren't able to do?
I mean, I think that is where it ties directly to my deservedness, my ability to, if I take that vitamin, I feel good about myself. Not only because the vitamin makes me feel good about myself, but also because the fact that I said I was going to take the vitamin and I took it, that also is good for, like, it kind of rises my goodness, my good relationship with myself. And there are times where toying with, am I a good person? Do I deserve those things? Can I be that happy? Like, a lot of people around me are not happy. Can I be happy when everyone around me seems to not be happy? Like, there's a lot of pressure from the outside, where that's why who you hang out with is a really important choice you make. Because I was on a conversation with a dear friend of mine, and yesterday, and the conversation was really fascinating, because I started with, I have never been so healthy. I'm going to the gym. I'm playing pickleball 2 hours a day, and I will die so healthy. Like, I'm going to be the healthiest older woman in the world, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going at it like full on. And she picks up and says, wow, I've never felt so old. I think I'm really starting to feel like the breaking down. But that didn't mean she wasn't happy for me. Like, she was able to, in that moment, celebrate what was happening. And I was able to have compassion that she is older than me and that she is experiencing a fragility that is not in my thing of experience right now. But there was room. There was room for me to be this like exuberant, excited, full of energy person. And that it didn't mean it made shadow towards her and what she was experiencing. And I don't have that many people in my life that I can say, I have the room to be me, which doesn't mean she has to pretend she's somewhere else. I don't have to pretend I'm not where I am, because I don't want to make her not feel good. Like, there is a lot of that going on, that when people connect through their misery, that's an important piece of this puzzle, is that we want connection. And if I say to you something, I don't know, I was raped as a very young woman, that's a horrible thing. And the second I say that, I can see it in your eyes, Rahul, immediately. There's like, oh, wow, like that's really like it pulls compassion. It pulls like it probably taps you into, I feel safe to tell her some things of my life. Like it does all these things. But can we not connect as well through our power and our goodness and our wealth and our all the goodness? I think as a society, we're still pretty much addicted to complaining and gossiping and doing all these things so that we somehow feel the connectivity, the connected tissue. And there's a lot of books out there that I've written that I've toyed with lately with this idea that it's like, why don't we connect through our gorgeousness? Like, are we so in a culture where we should be ashamed of success, and not success because of the big car, but success because of the inner, gorgeousness?
That's really interesting. I love the emphasis on the connection, and it makes me think about these fields that we create, interpersonal, social fields, that then things become easy within those fields or difficult. I do work here on Maui with a lot of folks in recovery, actually. And that's one of the big things that is always encouraged within recovery from drugs and alcohol addiction is going to meetings, making relationships with other people who are about the same things that you're doing. And so it sounds to me like, to go to Rahul's example, Rahul needs a vitamin club. He needs, like, he put the vitamins in the right place, but he needs someone, he needs Kirti or something to be like, hey, did you take your vitamins? Like, oh, I took my vitamins. I'm so excited. Like, do you want to take your vitamins? And that somehow so much of our evolution is wrapped up in our social reflections. And this goes back to the paradox thing, right? Because we were just talking about the negative, dark side of that, how we're all competing and keeping up with the Joneses. But what I hear you saying, Sophie, is that we need to come together around the things that are genuinely healthy for us, that are genuinely inspiring, and to be able to reach across the divide, the gap there of fear that, like, people will reject me for that, or that people will not want to do the same thing, and to recognize that actually, no, we're all longing for health. We're all longing for a sense of purpose and our productivity. Yeah. Would you agree with that like kind of our social embeddedness is a big piece of this?
I do. And I do think that some people, when you say people, I think people will reject you sometimes. Like, I do think that some of the choices I've made have caused people, like the way I demand honest conversations, the way I ask people to not have behaviors that are passive aggressive, that there's something doesn't work, that we should really bring it up with honesty and care. And some people run, but it's like, okay, well, I'm playing soccer, you're playing tennis, nothing wrong. We're not on the same field. It's fine. I just don't choose people that like the attachment. There's one of my friends, we grew up together. My mother delivered next door to this woman, and the two became best friends, and therefore I became best friend with that kid, who, if I met her today, I could not spend 5 minutes with her, but she's like a sister, right? Because I've known her all along. Every conversation we have, every single one of them, she tells me how much she hates her job, how much she hates the husband, how much she wishes she didn't have the children. And it's been like 40, 50 years. And every time I lovingly say, there might be other options. Like, have you thought of other ways that maybe you could create more happiness and this and that and the other? No. Well, do you want to know that last year she left the husband and she left the job, and she really is healthier and happier than she's ever been. So, timeline, I don't think there is a timeline in the universe. I've really learned to kind of let people. Sometimes you make a small jump and another small jump and another small jump, and then some people make no jumps at all for their most of their lives, and then seconds before it ends, they make the jump, whatever that is. And so people have their own internal rhythms with that I trust. I think at the heart of what we're saying, that you were asking earlier, Gabe, I think I trust intrinsically. I trust us. I trust us as people. I trust us as a society. Do we lose our way? Do we sometimes turn off the light? Do we sometimes, probably, but that's, look at nature. Sometimes there's typhoons that are killing people, and sometimes there is a seed that becomes this tree that feeds the village. It's we can't sit there. Nature reflects the complexity of what all these options are and all these possibilities are. And I trust that so let's just speak, each one for ourselves. But it's like when I saw the vitamin moment, and I saw that I was deliberately doing something against my wellness, it was a moment of, okay, I mean, fine, but then where are you going with that? Like, if you're not going to take care of yourself, then nobody is going to take care of you. So how does that work? And that was really a deep, deep shift for me, to start looking at the vitamin and feel the resistance, but somehow take a breath and go get the vitamin, do it. And then after I do it, it's like, all right, I did it one day. That's good. I'll do it again tomorrow. It is a habit building, a habit growing process. Like, I don't think I could have said all these things when I was in my 20s. I really don't. It was a journey, and sometimes not an easy one to get to. When before I was a kleptomaniac when I was a young person, I would steal from stores all the time. It's like now I left a store with a hat on because I was trying it on and I didn't pay for it and the thing didn't ring. I couldn't. I was in my car and I was like, that's not what I do. I just don't do that stuff anymore. And I had to go back up and like pay for the hat. That's an act of self-love, because if I don't, I go to bed and I'm like, wow, I stole a hat today. It's like, I don't want that life. That's not, that does not give me the confidence and the goodness that I want inside of my heart.
Yeah, I'm reminded, Sophie, with what you're talking about here. I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes from the book Atomic Habits, where it was something along the lines of, every action we take is a vote for the type of person that we want to become, and that connection between identity and action. And often, actually, people focus on the action when really you have to start by cultivating an identity, and then the identity supports the action, and vice versa. But I think, I think, one, I'm appreciating your call to like trust and have faith, and let sort of time and readiness take its own course. And then the other part of me noticed kind of my own impatience surfacing, where I was like, okay, but if I want to do something about it, if I want to accelerate it, like, how can I do that? And I think that moment that you were talking about, where you, for the first time, had that internal transformation of like, hey, like, taking this vitamin is a vote for somebody who loves themselves, right? For an identity of self-care, of what inspired that shift for you? Because I think we've talked about one really powerful catalyst, which is our connections, our community, the people we're around, the energy that we're around. What are some other catalysts that people can be aware of, or maybe some tools or tactics they can use to deepen that self-love, or to get them to take that first step that then snowballs into something greater?
The idea that when you do spring cleaning in your house, it starts with, let's take out everything that's in the closet in the kitchen and let's put it all on the counter. That's where it starts. And then you get to say, I like this, I'm keeping it. I don't like that, I'm not picking, this one is broken. Okay. I recommend that we do that with our inner conversations, our inner beliefs, our inner choices. Like, we literally visit ourselves. Like, it's almost like, imagine us as a village, and there's all these different houses we got to go visit. What's my relationship to fear? What's my relationship with money? What's my relationship with love? What's my relationship with myself, or with this fly that's been in the house this whole time I'm talking to you, flying around me? Like, what is my relationship to all these things that I get to visit and choose? Some of them are going to be, I'm going to continue to do this. Some of them are going to be like, no, I really don't like this. I'm done with this behavior. So I think one of the big, and interestingly, when I coach people, the very beginning of the work is this process where we look at where the time is spent. Where are you spending your time? And is that the vote? I love that quote. I've not heard this directly, but I love this quote of like, is this a vote for this person that you want to be, or is this the vote for someone that you don't? And so if you burnt out, I don't know what happened, Gabe, when you decided to go beyond that couch for a few weeks. If you burnt out and you need to recover, there really is no better place than for you to be with the waterfalls and the couch. That's a smart choice. If you're in really good shape and you have all this energy and you have all these things to give and you're full of desire to contribute, then it probably would be a little bit of a waste of time, because you would be out there giving to others and contributing, and that would be incredibly fulfilling for you. But if you burned out, there is no giving nothing to anyone if you're not giving it to yourself. That's why sometimes these conversations are difficult, because it depends. If you've been sabotaging yourself the whole way and everything that's good for you, you find a way to eliminate it, I would start there. I would start looking at like, wow, every person that said I love you or was kind to me, I found a way to get them out of my life. That's interesting. Like, again, curiosity. Gay Hendricks has this beautiful move. He goes like this. I wonder. I love that so much. Something will happen and you'll be like, I wonder what that is. I wonder what that means. I wonder what it's bringing to me. When you really go at it with this kind of curiosity, the wisdom, the goodness you get, and you don't need to do it multiple times. You'll do it the one time, and then you'll get the juice of it. You'll get the vibrancy of it, and then you get a different lesson. You get something else, which I love. Did we stay on the same track? Where did I go? Yes, the awareness of the thing is really where it starts. Like I'll ask people when I coach people, something will come up like, what are you afraid of? I don't know. I've never thought about it. Wow, you've never thought about what you're afraid of? Okay, let's start there. Let's start self knowing, right? Like what we don't know, we're afraid of. So if we don't get to know this thing, this beast that we are, then we're going to be afraid of ourselves and stay on the couch doing gambling, eating chocolate cake.
I, I'm curious about, Sophie, the process of change throughout all this. You brought up the example I mentioned earlier, so I can elaborate on that, which is actually everything I was doing before I took this downtime was all meaningful for me, and it still is. So I feel like kind of conflicted, but there is I think what I sensed into while I was in that kind of inner inquiry time is that there's something beyond there's something else that's trying to happen, or there's a refinement of what I have been doing that is kind of part of the natural process of growth and evolution and change. And I feel like, so often, and I'm struggling with that myself now, is like we get very attached to the decisions we made yesterday or 6 months ago, and we want to continue to, because they do give us meaning, but there are degrees or layers to it, right? And so there's not there's 24 hours in a day, right? There's 7 days in a week. So there's a finiteness to what we can do with our time and with our life. And so I'm curious if you could just speak to that, like making decisions between good things and greater things, things that are positively productive and things that are more positively productive, or maybe things that were really good for us 6 months ago that now we're trying to change where we're at today. I think it's hard for us sometimes to make those shifts because we're like, wait a minute, it's a good thing. I'm committed to it. And so how do we navigate those sorts of circumstances where you have a better thing coming in to replace things that are already good, or something that's good that's maybe turning stale?
I think and first of all, congratulations that you're already starting from your life is meaningful.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people don't have that. They don't, seriously. Like a lot of people, they will go. I remember doing a podcast, like one of my favorite clients came to me because he heard me on a podcast say, Fridays, Mondays, same thing. It's like when you love your life, like I don't have the Friday afternoon, like, yay, I'm going on the weekend, because I love my weekends, I love my weeks, whatever. Like I love what I do. Like otherwise I'm not saying yes to them. And he was blown away by that because most of his life was stuff he doesn't really want to do. So congratulations, because honestly, I don't run into, especially before they work with me, after a lot more, but before they work with me, a lot of people come because they have done the grind and they have done the stuff that they were told was going to give them the happiness, and it's not there, you know? So, yay. To answer the question, it's already a bit of an interesting framework that we should be doing. Like you said, it's difficult to change and we have committed to something and we don't really want to, change the direction of the boat. I already call slightly BS on that. Why? I mean, as long as you're not telling me I'm going to sell the children and go, on a boat all by myself and sell my children for organs or things like that. As long as you're not doing something that's destructive to someone else, change is a beautiful thing. I thrive on change. Like I love change because I trust. First of all, you clean up the listening tool you have inside of you. So, but when you do that, you can sense. I know when something is wanting to be birthed, that's a little bit different. I can feel the rumbling of that, but I've developed a relationship with that part of me. It didn't happen overnight. Like when I decided to move from France to here was probably the first time when it was like, I have to do this. It's just very clear to me that I do not want to live in a country that, whatever, we can do a lot of bullet points of why I wouldn't want to live there, but it was very clear. And at that time already, I trusted enough of this inner wisdom that I knew. Would I have been happy staying in France? Maybe. I don't know, but there was a clear turn that needed to happen. My turns are becoming more subtle because I listen to them before they yell. I think turns sometimes start yelling at us. Typically, it starts to hurt our bodies. We start getting more sick, or we hurt our knees, or we start doing things like I strongly believe in the somatic, the body talks to us. And so if you don't listen when it's whispering, it's okay. It's just going to start going up in volume until you now are like, okay, well, this is like I no longer can get out of bed, so I'm going to have to make a choice here. So I recommend to people, I invite people in a very practical way to listen to, wow, every time I do the hour of watching social media, my energy goes from being really dynamic to being completely zapped. That's interesting because what did I do? I compared and I looked at this other girl who has this other thing, and for what? Like what did I what's the benefit of that? So I think it calls for a little bit of more courage. I think a lot of people, and not courage from, you chicken if you don't do it. Courage actually in French is a beautiful word. It comes from cœur, agir, which means to put your heart in action, to put your heart in motion. Courage is when you see something that's like, maybe that's not exactly what I want, and you have the heart to move towards something else. And I don't know if it's true for you both, but I find that when I have the courage to take a step towards the thing, I get an indicator. Yeah, that was the right thing. Or, yeah, maybe not yet. And then I back off a little bit. It's like I've learned. It's like, how do you drive your car? When it's red, you stop. When it's green, you go. When it needs gas, you give it to it. Like you do all those things. We don't do really the same for ourselves. And I think it's in that vicinity that we get to find, like if I'm exhausted, I don't do substances. I mean, I do some substances, but I don't do substances that alter my energy. Like if I'm tired, I don't do coffee, I rest. So it's a very bizarre concept that people really don't grasp. Like, what do you do when you're tired? Oh, well, I take a nap, so to tie it to what you were saying, to have developed a relationship, people want to have a relationship with themselves and have intuition and have, without feeding that relationship, we have inside of ourselves a team of people, a very young person in there that may have been completely ignored by our parents and by ourselves all along. And it's like you can't just come in the room and be like, demand that it tells you what to do. It doesn't start there. It starts with, wow, you know what? I got an inkling that I shouldn't have gone out that night, and I really shouldn't have gone out that night. And I come somehow you start tracking that you did hear that it would have been better to stay home and rest, and you overcame and you didn't, and then you got sick, or then you something happened, and you start the way you do it with someone else. How do you build a relationship? Like, I'm listening to you. When you say something, I integrate what you say. I say something, you integrate what I say. It's like we're in relationship. But how do you develop that with yourself? I think answers all of these things we've been asking. How do you get the wisdom? How do you get the courage? How do you find the wealth and the purpose? Like, all those things, I think, live in the Rumi quote of, in the field of where you're not wrong and I'm not wrong and we're in the middle there.
Yeah, this is taking me back to the early part of our conversation, right, where we were talking about that compass that lives within us. And I think what I'm hearing from you right now, Sophie, is sort of a call to action that, hey, we have to keep tuning the sensitivity and the power of that compass within ourselves, and doing so in a way where we not only trust the signal, but the signal's stronger. It's more resilient to circumstances. It points us to where we want to go. We're able to see it even when the lens over the compass is a little foggy, right? And so that sensitivity to what that compass is telling us grows. And I think two other ideas that have been really big for me this year that I've been thinking about a lot that tie to the scenario that you threw out, Gabe, and what you were just saying, Sophie. One is from essentialism and just that idea that, hey, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So there is something about limiting, accepting limitations, but actually using those constraints as a way to help us or push us towards the things that we consider more and more important. And then the other concept is from this book of Necessary Endings, which talks about pruning as being a really important quality. Like if you're nurturing a plant, pruning is very important. And everyone always thinks of, hey, I got to prune the dead leaves or the dead flowers. That's the obvious one. Or, hey, I have to prune the like overgrowth. But actually, the other piece that's really important is pruning flowers that are good, but hey, like if you want the plant to focus its energy in a select few areas, you actually have to prune even parts of the plant that might appear healthy. And I think what you were just talking about, Gabe, was really making me think about that. It's like, hey, like that's part of this productivity paradox too, that often I think we think of productivity as doing more and more and more and more, and actually I think this entire conversation has been more about channeling that energy of productivity and redefining it to be doing the things that matter to us, and focusing our energy towards, towards that. And so just, yeah, I was feeling these disparate, but not so disparate ideas, this connective thread across all of that. So thought I'd share that. And just, as we look to wrap here, getting a little bit of a time check here, Sophie. I wonder, do you have a kind of a takeaway, a final takeaway that you might want to leave our listeners with as we look to close out this conversation?
Yeah, which is actually not where I thought we would end, like always. That's why when people are like, what do you want the conversation to be? I'm always like, I don't know. Let's see where the conversation wants to go, because I trust that. I'm inspired to speak to this idea that it's really okay to say no. It's really like, as you were speaking, I kind of was reminded this, like, no is a full sentence. Like, it's really okay when something comes your way. You don't have to say yes. Like, it's really okay to pause, maybe take a second, whether it's on vacation of sorts or just in everyday life. Like, the very first step is, do I want to take that on? Do I want to say, once I say yes, like a lot of people say yes because they don't know how to say no. And then they find themselves procrastinating because they never really wanted to do the thing in the first place. So my strong suggestion is for people to, because they'll look at their calendar and they'll say, oh, there's so much more space in 3 weeks. We should do it then. If you don't want to do it now, there's a good chance you won't want to do it then. And by then, your schedule won't be as open as it is now because you'll be closer to it and you'll have filled it up. And so this act of whatever courage to say, I love you. Thank you for offering. I appreciate that you want to do that with me. And no, I'm not going to, is really an acceptable answer. That's my takeaway.
That's beautiful. Well, Sophie, it's just so wonderful speaking with you. It's just the what you've shared, in your words, but also just the energy, the joy that is very apparent in your being, and I feel like it just emanates out. And I felt very happy and joyful having this conversation with you, and I'm sure folks listening to this also felt that way. So I just want to say thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
Thank you to have me with you.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Gabe said. I think just the energy of this conversation is has just been very special, and appreciate Sophie your joining our project here.
Thank you.
So, for folks listening, I hope that this conversation gives you some insight into your own directions for dealing with the productivity paradox and thinking about what is it that you really want to do? Why is it that you do the things that you currently do? And where might life, your inner compass, be calling you? And I don't doubt at all that if you follow that, the world will be benefited, including us. And so we hope this has been helpful for you. If you enjoy listening to our show, please, again, share this with a friend who you think that could be helped by this conversation. You can leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts and join our newsletter to follow along on the journey. We love making this show for y'all and sharing in this experience. And thanks again, Sophie, for joining us today. And we will see you next time. Thanks so much and take care.